Ripples and internal squabbles within the rank and file of Buhari's team over President Buhari's directives against arbitrary removals of heads of agencies by their ministers. There is a guideline from the office of the SGF. And Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State has vowed to jail any parent who enroll their children into the Almajiri system of education, warning that every child in the state must be enrolled into formal basic education. Hello everyone and welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimaloye in Lagos. All may not be well as it appears some controversies is raging within the government at the center after President Muhammadu Buhari warned against arbitrary sack removals of heads of agencies. We understand that loads and loads of controversies are raging. Tonight, we look at the issues and dissect what has become a major ripples within the Buhari government. The opposition party is already speaking about it, and we'll look into the matter. But first, let's tell you that Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State has vowed to jail any parent who enroll their children into the Almajiri system of education, warning that every child in the state must be enrolled into formal basic education. He also warns that the Almajiri system of education has been banned in Kaduna State, and any Islamic cleric caught operating such schools will be also jailed for not less than 2 years.
We'll track each and every one of them very, very closely to ensure that their parents don't let them go again. And any parent that does that would be prosecuted and could go to prison for as many as 2 years. Any Almajiri teacher that takes any child or enrolls any child into so-called Almajiri school will also go to prison and be fined, I think, 100,000 naira or 200,000 naira per child.
Well then, let's get to our major discussion of tonight. Within the rank and file of President Buhari's cabinet or team and those who are working close to him, all seems not to be well. Well, President Buhari is giving stern warning to his ministers against what he termed as an arbitrary removals of heads of agencies. The Secretary to the Government of the Federation, the SGF, Mr. Boss Mustafa, issued a procedure for the removal of heads of public agencies in the country. In the memo being circulated, the SGF said the federal government has observed the arbitrary removal of chief executive officers and its impact on stability and service delivery in the country. The said circular was issued last week when Mr. Saleh Manman, Minister of Power, announced the removal of Mr. Usman Mohammed, the Managing Director of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN. Well, one cannot say for sure if the memo in question that you can see right on your screen is inspired by that incident, the removal by the Minister of Power. The memo from the SGF's office stated emphatically that no minister under this government can unilaterally remove CEOs of agencies, adding that the president has approved a disciplinary procedure against any heads of agencies. A guideline has been released on how to go about removal or discipline of a head of government agencies. Let's dissect this matter and what this means for us, because we understand that those at the helm of affairs are at loggerheads about what is happening. Those are some of the information that we have about some of the issues that are happening and what these may have caused in a bureaucratic process or system in government at the center. Tonight, we get the benefit of some experience. Tonight, I have a former Minister of State for Interior and that of Defense at the time, Mr. Demola Seriki, joins us from our Abuja studio. Also, Mr. Ezenwa Unwagu. He is a civil society person. He's the Executive Director of Partners for Electoral Reforms. Both of them will be sharing their experience tonight on the program. Let's begin with Mr. Demola Seriki, former Minister of State for Interior, and also he served as a former Minister of State for Defense as well. What we saw as a circular from the office of the SGF is that something that is new, because the SGF quoted portions of the law, which we'll dissect in the coming minutes, about the procedure of removal. We've seen a lot of heads of agencies that have been removed in the last months or years under the Buhari government. What I understand that Mr. Ezenwa Nwagwu is there with us. Mr. Ezenwa Nwagwu, give us a sense of what do you think is happening at that level of government in Nigeria?
Well, Shehu, I think that what we're seeing is perhaps lack of coordination, if you like, and where people begin to think that they are some sort of island to themselves, especially ministers and boards. And this is without regard to extant rules and regulations that govern both appointments and exit from public service. You recall that often political appointees get their letters of appointment from the secretary to the government of the federation. And then they get sack letters from ministers. And in the particular case of Ministry of Power that you refer to, we have seen that that particular minister seemed to be now notorious, if you permit the use of that word, in sacking, suspending, apparently without recourse to processes and procedures that guide this. And that's why you see the SGF doing what he should be doing, and being the clearinghouse of government, it's coming very clearly to say, hey, you don't do this. And my expectation is that ministers will ordinarily, even from the point of the appointments, and members of boards should ordinarily be conversant with these extant rules and regulations. First and foremost, the issue around fair hearing, which is very important, making sure that there is an investigative panel so that you don't just come and rubbish, people, and then eventually in the Ministry of Power, 2 particular cases have happened where that minister made appointment, sacked people, and the president reversed them. That of the bulk, I think is the bulk purchase company, and the other one where those appointments were reversed, those sacks were reversed by the president. So I don't think that the SGF is coming very strong to say, hey, you need to abide by the rules and regulations that guide how we operate in public service, and anything outside of that, of course, is arbitrary, and we need to clean our house. That's what I see happening right now.
Nwagwu, I suspect that you have seen the said circular and the memo from the office of the SGF, which basically highlighted the procedure, disciplinary action that is supposed to be followed under the Establishment Act and the principles guiding the public service under this Chapter 3 and 16. Those are some of the portions that have been stated. So when some of these people were removed, you recall what happened with the SEC, former SEC DG. The case went to court, and afterwards the court asked him to be reinstated. We've seen what has happened in the past few weeks also, where in fact a sitting minister and a head of agency were being seen to be having spat on Twitter. What does this say about you mentioned coordination, but again, if all of these removals have happened in the past, could they be said to be illegal removers?
Yeah, so you can follow the process, for instance, with that of NECO. The Minister of Education followed the process. If you remember, the Professor Uwakwe was suspended 2 years ago, and if you followed that process, you will see that even his letter of sack was very clear that the president was acting on an investigative panel. But what we have seen, and the Minister of Power is not alone on this, you saw the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs also doing exactly this not long ago. You've seen the Minister of Power constantly with the data of the TCN. There is no no clear evidence that the proper procedures for disengaging public servants were taken into consideration. And if you know, one of the reasons the public service is attractive to a lot of people is because of the rigor, of even the engagement, the termination. You don't just terminate people. There has to be a query. There has to be a response. Interdicting people publicly has the tendency and potential to ruin the integrity and character of some of the people you just threw out like that. So what has happened in this government is that we have seen that people go straight to the president without recourse to where they get their letters of appointment. And the office of the SGF is for me, the clearinghouse. And so that disregard, that disrespect for processes and going straight to the president, and the president eventually having to come back and investigate by himself, which actually the office of the CGF is supposed to have cleared out, being the one that is responsible for coordinating MDAs in government. So these ministers and boards are acting arbitrarily. If it happened even in News Agency of Nigeria, in Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. Now, on 2 occasions, the Minister of Power has been, clearly told that he does not have the powers to do what he's doing.
So,
the woman that eventually left for the UN, yes.
Yeah. So the question is that, does this memo or this situation that has arisen, does it reduce the power or influence of the minister in the Buhari cabinet?
No, it does not. It does not remove the powers. It simply tells you to go through the process. There's a process. There is no hurry. If somebody is guilty, okay, and you set up a panel for the person to face a panel, there's a probe, and the outcome of the probe is indicting, it will be obvious to everybody. But the point is that what you are seeing is that the minister wakes up and sacks or suspends and then comes back to explain. I was giving you the instance of the case in NECO, for instance. 2 years ago, only last week did we see the appointment of a replacement for Professor Owakwe in Professor Obioma. Okay? Meaning that within that period of 2 years, the issues that led to that suspension had been laid to rest. And the president can clearly say, look, you have been found guilty. And if you are not, the Minister of Education is also a minister. So he could also wake up and suspend people, but he goes through the process. The power to do that is resident, but it is not without restraint, it is not without regulation.
But again, Mr. Ezenwa, for those who think that this is some kind of power tussle at the highest places in the federal government, would you say the SGF or some other power blocks are asserting themselves, perhaps thinking that they've been sidelined in the scheme of things, based on what some critics are already implying?
Well, I just think that there are processes. If for instance, you know the powers that are resident in a particular place, and you decide to short circuit that process, the person occupying that office is not making any new issues. If you look at the SGF is calling attention to existing rules and regulations, procedures through a circular that is even an inheritance from earlier traditions. It is not something that he invented or any other person invented. And these ministers, in the process of this ritual of a retreat that happens at the appointment of boards and ministers, they should be apprised of these procedures, of these circulars, so that they are conversant with it and they know their limitations and their powers. What we see most often than not is that people like to be territorial. People like to claim their territories and sometimes even exercise powers that they do not have. So if there is a regulator, and I think in this particular case, the Office of the Secretary to the Government is the regulator, is the one who must make sure that there is stability, that there is, cohesion, and there is cooperation within government. That I think is the role of the the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, and to remind people who wield these powers through these government circulars that you have to abide and obey these regulations.
All right, let's take a break, and when we return, we will talk more about this situation that the PDP, the opposition party, says is a hostility in the presidency, asking that the Federal Executive Council should be disbanded. Has it gotten to that point? We hear from a former minister in the Federal Cabinet. That's after the break, everyone. Join us again. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's get back to the conversation. Political analysts are already saying that there seems to be some controversies in the presidency about what memo that came out from the SGF's office about what they've termed arbitrary sack and the president's approval of a mandatory guideline in discipline or sacking any head of agency by any minister. So there's been an order that no minister can sack any head of agency. The PDP has come out to say the opposition party referred to what has happened as hostilities in the presidency, and is saying that the Federal Executive Council has become cancerous and should be disbanded. Let's get to some benefits of experience from a former Minister of Aviation who also served as a head of agency, ambassador of government. Mr. Osita Chidoka joins us on the program. Thank you so much, former Minister, for coming on tonight. Let me begin by asking you, from your experience as a former head of a federal agency and a former minister, the memo from the office of the SGF, does that conform with the standard procedure in government and in public service?
Thank you very much, and good evening to the viewers. Yes, the memo from the Secretary to Government is only restating what every public servant should know already. So I wear two caps. I have worked as a chief executive, and then I have worked as a minister. And also, during my time as a chief executive, I reported to the office of the Secretary to Government. Interestingly, I did my youth service in the office of the Secretary to Government when Gidado Idris was Secretary to Government. What I see in this government is a total disregard for the office of the Secretary to Government. The Secretary to the Government is the coordinator of the presidency. He is the person that ensures that the president is interacting with his appointees in a harmonious manner. He is an important person in government. And I think that what has happened is that the office of the Chief of Staff to the President and other people close to the President have whittled down the powers of the Secretary to Government. So ministers now go on issues of appointments directly to the President to get appointments. So what the SGF has done is to restate what is already the rule. Particularly, this is a failure of Nigeria's public service. The permanent secretaries in the ministries are the chief advisors to the ministers. They ought to advise the ministers that this is not the process for removing a chief executive. As a chief executive, I faced 3 administrative panels within my 6 months of assuming office due to petitions arising from various people. And each of the panels was followed, the process was followed, memos written to the president then, Yaradua, clearing me from all the allegations in the petition. And I subsequently faced so many other panels throughout my tenure as a chief executive, because it is the course of government to always investigate, to give fair hearing to the other side. But what has happened is that the executive lawlessness that has been introduced by this government in the removal of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Onogen, without referring to the NJC, appointing a chief judge without going to the NJC, has emboldened the ministers to begin to act as emperors of the manor. So I think that what has happened is that the tone set that service chiefs who have reached their mandatory retirement age are allowed to keep operating as service chiefs, that people who are rejected by the National Assembly are continue to be in their acting capacity. This goes to show you that a culture of disregard for process has become established. And what you are seeing today from the ministers is the inevitable outcome of a consistent refusal to abide by the rules of the game. So I must restate that the SGF is properly right in his in the memo he has issued.
So, Mr. Chidoka, as a former minister, my question again will be, where does this leave the ministers where there is an erring CEO or head of agency who is getting out of line? Has this reduced the powers and influence of a minister in cabinet?
No, the beauty of a democracy, the beauty of a constitutional government, it is that you must follow the rules. So a chief of every appointee of the president, including heads of agencies, are appointees of the president. They are not appointed by the ministers. So the ministers have oversight function on them. And when they go wrong, there is a stipulated process, either to go to the board of the agency, as the case may be, or the minister acting as the board, to institute a panel. The permanent secretaries should advise the ministers. The permanent secretaries, the civil service has betrayed this government, this country, because they have refused to advise government agents that this is not the way to go. You set up a panel, it could take you 2 weeks, it could take 4 weeks, it could take you 6 months, or it could take you 2 days to review that action and report back to the appointing authority, who is the president. It doesn't bring down the power of the minister. So long as the minister is not in cahoots with the chief executive, so long as you are not sharing bribes with the chief executive, you are not collecting money from them, so long as you do not bring yourself down to the level of becoming their, a collector, a toll gate from the chief executives, they will respect the office of the minister.
So, Mr. Chidoka, So there's another issue here. From what we've seen several removals of these heads of these agencies, and we've seen some kind of discord, if you may call it, or disagreement between ministers and some heads of agency. How would you describe, so someone who has served at that highest level, how would you describe what is happening presently under this government?
It is the same thing that the PDP is calling for. We are saying that this government have not expressed the reason for its existence. This government does not respect rules. This government have shown consistent disdain for rules. Therefore, the ministers are acting in line. The chief executives are acting in the same line. What we see today is that some chief executives feel that they are bigger than even their ministers because of how they were appointed, who appointed them, and the access they have in the villa. So they go against the ministers. But if the ministers have not soiled their hands with those chief executives, they can follow the process. They can call the chief executives to order by following that process. I remember the many cases that I've been privy to throughout my days in service. I've never had to go against my supervising authority. But many people who did, they have the process. They set up the administrative panel. They send the civil servants to review. And once you are found guilty to have done that, they recommend your sack. On no occasion have I seen any President Passenger or Goodluck refusing the recommendation of a minister against a chief executive.
So if you see this, perhaps in 30 seconds, if we may anchor, Mr. Chidoka, if this kind of situation is happening where some people have described it as some kind of disunity in the government, what do you think that the president could do, especially when the SGS have weighed in on this matter and there is a new chief of staff in saddle?
Well, it is still the call that it is dangerous for Nigeria. The country is about facing one of its worst recessions. The Minister of Finance has acknowledged that. We have a massive drop in revenue. We have the potential of a disease spreading across the country and killing people. There is no time for disunity in the cabinet. So if this cabinet cannot get in line with the ethos of modern governance, if this cabinet cannot work in line with our constitution, with lines with laid down rules and procedure, I think the time for the president to dissolve this cabinet and appoint a cabinet that has respect for rules by himself, starting to respect the rules.
All right.
What Justice Onogen should stop and then start with the rules to ensure that we have a constitutional government in Nigeria.
Mr. Osita Chidoka, a former Minister of Aviation and an advisor to the National Chairman of the PDP. Thank you so much indeed for your time tonight. That's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye for now.